Hello, I'm Deb Knight. Welcome to this special edition of A Current Affair as we continue our coverage of the funeral of Pope Francis. It is, of course, a sombre day for 1.4 billion Catholics, a day rich with tradition and with history. This is a live picture of the funeral mass that is underway in St Peter's Square, the famous area named after the very first Pope, St Peter. 250,000 people have come from all around the world to celebrate Pope Francis's life and, of course, to farewell him. Most have lined up for hours to be part of this truly historic occasion, one of the few where religion, faith, politics and royalty all come together in the one place at the one time. Tonight I'm joined by Associate Professor Joel Hodgej, the Australian Catholic University's Head of Theology, to help navigate us through the ceremony that is very much steeped in tradition as well as the history and what lies ahead over the coming days as the Catholic Church moves towards a new papacy. Joel, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Do you wish you were there?
It would be great to be there. It's a historic occasion. It's an amazing event for the Catholic Church, for the world. To have a Pope die is always a very important occasion, but Pope Francis, who had such a huge impact on the world in so many different ways, you can see just by all the dignitaries that are there, all the cardinals, all the bishops, all the world leaders. It's like John Paul II's funeral all over again.
Yeah, and that was really marking the end of almost 3 decades that he was in the papacy. It's quite a remarkable turnout. So it started just over an hour ago, the funeral service. At what point are we at with the Mass right now?
So we just had the homily from Cardinal Ray, who is the Dean of the College of Cardinals. So he was reflecting on Pope Francis's life, on the Gospels, and now we're at the prayers of the faithful. So these are the prayers of the ordinary people of the Church, and they're being done in different languages. So it's really an ecumenical time for this liturgy, because most of the liturgy is done in Latin, and this part is done in many different languages. So we've got Arabic, Chinese, Spanish, and a number of other languages that express the different parts of the world where the Church is.
And the entire Mass started with the English being read first. Let's have a listen.
Truly, I understand that God shows no partiality. But in every nation, anyone who fears him and does what is right is acceptable to him. That everyone who believes in him receives forgiveness of sins through his name.
It's quite remarkable, as you say, you mentioned all of those languages, but it is a reflection of the Catholic Church itself being a global institution, but also it's a gathering of world's leaders too.
Well, there's no other institution like it. It's present all around the world, in every country. It's the biggest non-government organisation in the world, and it does so much important work around the world, and as we talked about, it's reflected in all the people that are present there. But that reading is especially touching because it reflected on Jesus' dying and rising from the dead, and then the forgiveness of sins. And mercy was very part of Pope Francis's papacy. He emphasised mercy and forgiveness so much. So that reading was very important and really beautiful thing for us in English that we could hear it.
And he didn't want any of the trappings of the papacy. He wanted a pared back funeral. It's still very elaborate though, what we're seeing unfold. Are his wishes being granted here today?
Certainly. He instituted new rules around the papal funeral. And these are being followed at the moment. Anything to do with the Catholic Church will always still have some pomp and ceremony because of the nature of the liturgy. The liturgy has certain structure and parts. The Mass that we're seeing here now, it's a conventional Mass, so it has to follow certain rules and structures, and that's what we're seeing. But Pope Francis has tried to pare it back, particularly in the lead-up. The lead-up can have a number of parts to it. There are a number of prayers and stages. He pared that back, and in his own way with the liturgy, we can see with the coffin in particular, that was a very simple coffin, only one layer of wood and that's it. So he wanted to make a statement there in terms of the type of coffin he had, but also the readings that were chosen too. they were special and to him.
So some personal touches as part of what is very much a traditional Catholic funeral mass.
Exactly, that's right, yeah. And the Gospel in particular had a personal touch. It talked about St. Peter and Jesus commissioning St. Peter to lead his flock, be with his people, and that's very much what Pope Francis did.
Yeah, well, it's all unfolding right now, and what we are seeing at Vatican City has been repeated for centuries every time a pope passes. But there are stark differences this time around after Pope Francis rewrote the book on papal funerals.
A ceremonial send-off fit for royalty, thousands of years of tradition, dating all the way back to the very first Pope St. Peter. For more than 500 years, St. Peter's Square has been the arena for papal funerals. Pope Pius XII, the first to be televised in 1958.
In silent sorrow, Rome's mourning thousands awaited the last return of Pope Pius XII.
Pope Pius died at the papal summer estate, his body then taken in a procession inside a gilded carriage.
The cortege passed the Colosseum, where pagan emperors martyred early Christians.
Back to Vatican City, to his final resting place inside St. Peter's Basilica. Pope John XXIII followed Pope Pius, leading the Catholic Church for just 4.5 years until 1963, when he died from stomach cancer. The global Catholic community filling St. Peter's Square to get their final glimpse of their leader.
A great figure is carried to rest. Rarely in history has a man been so mourned by all races, by all sects.
The next papal funeral was 15 years later, when Pope Paul VI died from a heart attack in 1978, also at the summer residence. Colour pictures of the papal funeral were streamed across the globe for the first time as government officials flew in. US First Lady Rosalind Carter, the East German leader, and Canadian delegates too. But 1978 would also see another Pope funeral when John Paul I died after just 34 days in the job from a massive heart attack. The first Pope to choose a double name, reflecting his two predecessors. John Paul I holds the shortest reign in modern papal history, and just a month after mourners filled St. Peter's Square for Pope Paul VI's funeral, again the Catholic faithful turned out. Standing in the rain as they farewelled John Paul I. Pope John Paul II was his successor, leading the Catholic Church for nearly 3 decades. After the turn of the century in 2005, he passed at the age of 84. His funeral went for more than 3 hours, and at the time was the largest attended funeral in history.
It was the calming influence. I think everybody now is at hoping the Holy Spirit is in command, and in a few days we'll have a new Pope.
But the next Pope funeral broke the mould. Pope Benedict XVI was leader of the Catholic Church from 2005 until he took the unusual step to retire in 2013. It would be another decade before he passed away, remembered in 2023 as Pope Emeritus.
It's a beautiful experience, but also it's humbling for me, as a priest, to get to have this experience in Rome.
His successor, Pope Francis, presided over his funeral, the first pope to do so.
Francis, with a blessing and a prayer, a fond farewell.
Benedict was placed in the traditional 3 coffins of cypress, lead and oak and buried beneath his beloved St. Peter's Basilica. Now Pope Francis's turn, he rewrote the papal funeral rites book before his passing. He wanted to signify his funeral would be that of a simple disciple, not a powerful man of this world. requesting to be buried in a single pine coffin outside St. Peter's Basilica, breaking with a century of tradition at his favourite church in Rome, St. Maria Maggiore, a humble final resting place for a man who was known as the People's Pope.
Yes, the People's Pope, much loved, and you can see that respect being played out right now in Vatican City, where the funeral for Pope Francis does continue. I'll come back now to Australian Catholic University's Associate Professor Joel Hodgej. Where are we at with the service at the moment? Because the Mass itself does go for, well, more than 2 hours, but there are particular moments that are quite poignant.
Yes, now we're in the Liturgy of the Eucharist, as it's called, the most important part of the Mass, we could say. That's where Christ's body and blood is consecrated and then will be shared with the congregation. So this is where we celebrate the most important, holiest part of the liturgy. And it's also a reminder of our movement towards God and God sharing his life with us. So we're actually seeing now a kind of foretaste of heaven, which is what Pope Francis is already experiencing. And there will be a moment in the liturgy at this point where they'll make a special prayer for Pope Francis to commend him to God, to pray for the repose of his soul.
Again, more of that personal touch to the Pope Francis. And in terms of the day itself, it's the scenes that we're seeing. It's just extraordinary with him on the steps of St. Peter's Basilica as well. And I mean, we've seen this, of course, with previous popes, but you just think, wow, what a remarkable moment of history that we're watching unfold.
Well, the Catholic Church is a singular institution. It's the longest running institution in the world. It's everywhere. And of course, Pope Francis is a singular leader. The Pope has such amazing moral, spiritual authority. And Pope Francis, I think, in his own way, used that to promote different causes. But I think people really resonated with him because he just lived out his Christian faith in a very simple, humble, clear and authentic manner. His love for Jesus and his witness to the love of Jesus was just clear in everything that he did. And I think we're seeing now in these scenes how much people appreciated that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll go now to our Europe correspondent, Jess Milwood, who has been in Vatican City for the last few days, watching as preparations for this historic day unfold. Jess, we are watching history, and as you described for us the last few days, as you've been reporting on this event, it's the culmination, a very sombre moment now.
Yeah, Deb, we've been watching, but we've also been experiencing. It's been impossible to be here in Rome and not feel the sense of occasion that this is. It is a great loss. This is a man that was loved by so many people around the world, not just Catholics, but non-Catholics alike, and that's certainly what we've seen. 250,000 people filing through St. Peter's Basilica to pay their respects and see the pontiff lying in state. Many people say that they weren't religious, but they felt the need to come out here and see him because they really respected the way he lived, the way he led the church and the values that he stood for. I spoke to one woman who said Pope Francis was the Pope that the world needed at the time, and that his 12 years of reign came at a point in which the world really needed to come together. He led with humility. We know that his legacy will be multidimensional and it will be enduring. We've seen extraordinary images play out. That simple wooden coffin that we're seeing right now, carried outside of the Basilica where it has been since Wednesday, into the very grand St. Peter's Square where it now sits front and centre, in front of world leaders, in front of royal families, in front of dignitaries, and perhaps most importantly for Pope Francis, in front of mourners. He was the people's Pope, and the people have certainly showed up for him today. We saw extraordinary scenes, as I spoke to you earlier, Deb, people running to get that front row position there in the square. But as soon as the opening prayer started, as soon as we started hearing those hymns, the mood most definitely shifted, and people are reflecting on what Pope Francis meant to them.
And Jess, it is a stunning day in Vatican City as well. Quite warm. I think it was 23 degrees was the top temperature. The crowds are in the sun.
Yeah, you could not have asked for a more beautiful day. There is not a cloud in the sky. It has been warm throughout this week, but we have had rain, but that's certainly not the case today. It is picture perfect. People have lined up for hours to see the Pope lying in state, and today is no different for his funeral. People have been taken away by paramedics throughout the week. It's just been so overwhelming. So there are a lot of emergency services on standby to assist anyone who needs it. Bottles of water have been handed out for Australians back home. 22 degrees might not seem that hot, but let me tell you, here in Rome it certainly is indeed. After these proceedings conclude, we know the Requiem Mass is set down to take around 2.5 hours. What we are going to witness will be something we haven't seen in more than a century. 1 million people, that is the estimation, will line the streets of Rome. Some 10 kilometres, the procession of Pope Francis's coffin will be taken past places like the Colosseum. So you can only imagine the breathtaking images we are going to see. And then he will be taken to Santa Maria Maggiore, taken up the stairs where people will be waiting with white roses. The poor, the marginalised, migrants, transgender people. It is so very Pope Francis. And as we heard from Pippa there a little bit earlier, funerals have been taking place for popes here for 500 years, but we have not seen anything quite like this.
Yeah, remarkable scenes. Jess Milwood overlooking the scene in St Peter's, just extraordinary. Joel, in terms of that broad church, as it were, within the Catholic faith, obviously previous popes have been a lot more conservative than Pope Francis was, but the fact that he was very progressive, do you think that he has helped usher in a new era for the church?
Certainly he's shifted the emphasis. I think that there was a lot of emphasis on church teaching in the past, and that had its place. And you can see just by what was said there, Pope Francis has really put out the welcome mat in a sense that rather than people being seen to be not welcome when they're not measuring up to church teaching in some way, Pope Francis has tried to flip that and say, actually, we need you, and you need to be part of the life of the church and with God, even in your difficult, challenging moments. That could be of help to you. So don't turn away just because you think, oh, you don't measure up. None of us measure up. So come and be part of it and receive all the grace and love of God that you need for your life. And Pope Francis was just beautiful in that witness, I think.
Yeah, very much the People's Pope, as he's been referred to. Welcome back to this special edition of A Current Affair, continuing our coverage of the funeral of Pope Francis. With me now is Joel Hodgej as the Mass continues from the Australian Catholic University. We're reaching quite a significant part of this Mass, aren't we, which our Catholic viewers would be very familiar with, the Holy Communion.
Exactly. This is the apex, the climax of the Mass, where Christ's body and blood is now shared with the congregation.
And done on a mass scale, though. How are they going to do this with a crowd that large?
So they've got all the priests there. You can see that they're distributing the communion directly to people. And Pope Francis actually allowed priests, not just cardinals and bishops, to celebrate this Mass. So he opened it up to the ordinary priest, which was a bit of a difference. And now they're distributing the body and blood. They just had the sign of peace too. We just saw all the different dignitaries making the sign of peace, including President Trump and some of the others.
Shaking hands with the French President, Emmanuel Macron, I think, was part of the sign of peace between the US President. Because it's all of those moments with the Mass that we're familiar with, but done on such a grand scale.
Exactly, exactly. And the sign of peace is a particularly poignant moment where everyone is meant to come together and reconcile. The Eucharist is meant to bring people together, just like Pope Francis did, bring them together in a communion of love. And so this is a beautiful thing that Pope Francis is allowing us to see and do. And soon after this, we'll have the commendation of his soul to God and then the procession.
And then the pontiff will be laid to rest, and that will be this evening our time. Attention after that, of course, will turn to electing his successor. No easy task. I know that the viewing of the movie The Conclave has gone up about 300% on the streaming services, but the process itself, it's steeped in secrecy, steeped in intrigue. It's remained largely the same, hasn't it, over the past 800 years, but it's a fascinating tradition.
Definitely. There's been changes and particularly to guard against political influence from the outside, because different European kings and emperors and aristocrats have wanted to get their person onto the papal throne. But it has stayed, relatively the same in recent years with some minor changes. And at the moment, the big, I guess, changes that have occurred is that with the cardinals, you can only be an elector up until you're 80.
There's about 150 of...
About 135 of those.
135 of those who are under the age
of 80. And there's about 250 cardinals that are alive. So Cardinal Ray, who's the Dean of the College of Cardinals, we've seen him presiding this Mass, he's over 80. So he'll help to prepare everything, but he won't be participating and electing the Pope. But he had particular respect of the Pope, so he's been allowed to be the Dean. But the other big factor, of course, is that we've got lots of cardinals from many different countries that didn't have cardinal representation in the past, so particularly from Africa and Asia. So that adds a new dimension to the whole equation as the cardinals get to know each other and get to know each other's contexts and priorities.
And work out who they may vote for. I know that it is a difficult task to single out who might well be the front runner, but we've got a few to take a look at, and I know that you know quite a few of them well. We'll start with Cardinal Robert Serra from Guinea, who seems to have opposing views to Pope Francis, more aligned with the two former popes as well. Is he likely more of a conservative voice?
Definitely. He was the head of the department or the dicastery for sacraments and liturgy, and he had a traditional orthodox way of doing things, and he was very well known as someone who was close to Pope Benedict and continued into Pope Francis's time, but some of his style probably didn't match as well with Pope Francis. He's an older cardinal. He's still able to elect, but probably not someone who maybe got the energy that Pope Francis has and all that kind of thing. But he does have a following. So initially it was thought he was out of contention. He had his time maybe in 2013 when Pope Francis was elected. That was his best opportunity. But because he has got a following, particularly amongst, as we more conservative people, however you want to construe that, and particularly online in social media, his interest in him has picked up. So the odds of him becoming Pope have shortened. I think it's probably still unlikely, but he is a bit of someone who's representing that conservative view, and someone and a lot of people on social media are hoping for him to be elected.
Well, we'll move through a few of the others quickly too. Peter Turkson from Ghana, another conservative.
And from Africa, so someone who has also been involved in the central governance of the church. He was the head of the department or the dicastery for integral human development, very much around social justice. So still, conservative in his outlook, I would say, but focused on social justice too.
And the people's favourite, perhaps, Louis Antonio Tagle, one of the youngest contenders at 67.
He was in contention still at the last conclave, though he was a bit young. So he's from the Philippines. He's very charismatic, someone who was close to Pope Francis, at least up until recent times. He was also involved in the central governance of the church, had some mishaps there, so we'll see whether the cardinals still see him as competent to be elected, but certainly someone in the line of Pope Francis.
Yeah,
yes.
The Catholic faith very strong in the Philippines, but the odds-on favourite, Italian Pietro Parolin, the Cardinal Secretary of State or Deputy Pope, in with a good chance?
Well, he could. I think he's not someone as charismatic as Pope Francis, so he wouldn't have the public appeal of Pope Francis, but he certainly has the leadership capacity, he has the administrative capacity. He's been involved in the governance of the church for a long time. He's got a lot of experience, a bit like Pope Paul VI, who was the Pope before John Paul I and John Paul II. So he would be seen as someone who would be a steady hand, someone who could carry on Pope Francis's agenda, at least in some form.
But a bit like picking the Melbourne Cup, very difficult to narrow down.
Exactly. And when you can't, the Italian saying is, you go into the conclave of Pope and you come out a cardinal. So you just never know who could get elected.
We'll soon find out after that 9 days of mourning. Welcome back. The funeral mass for Pope Francis is about to come to a close before the pontiff begins his final journey. Associate Professor Joel Hodgej from the Australian Catholic University is with me now. Again, it is the culmination of this mass right now, isn't it?
It is the distribution of Holy Communion at the moment, and then following that we'll have the commendation of Pope Francis, and that's a beautiful moment of the liturgy. They incense the coffin, they say some special prayers. Pope Francis inserted some prayers here from the Eastern churches and also from the Roman Church, the local church. So that's a beautiful part of the Mass. And then after that, there'll be the procession. And that will be quite a remarkable scene. It'll be the first time that we will have seen a Pope buried outside of Vatican City for 150 years. Very moving scenes when that procession begins. It will be, and I was just thinking of it as we were talking about it. It's an amazing moment now that it's really hitting home. Pope Francis has left us. Of course, he's in a much better place. That's why everyone's, I think, in a certain sense, joyous. Look at that, just remarkable. Yeah, and people are there to pay their respects, but also celebrate not only his life, but now his journey into God. For Christians, this is the culmination into the best part of life, which is now the bliss of God's life. But this will be a very, very moving time where we say goodbye to Pope Francis. And why did he choose the Basilica of Mary Major to be buried? He had a particular devotion to Mary, the mother of Jesus. He always sought her protection and help. And particularly when he became Pope, he visited this church to seek her help, to pray before her an icon, a special painting of her. He did it even before he became Pope, but it became a regular part of his pontificate before he went away and when he came back and other important occasions. During COVID, he had the special icon come to St. Peter's. He prayed before it. So he had a particular devotion to this church and to Mary as someone who protected and accompanied him. Yeah, well, those scenes, very moving scenes, will unfold shortly. Joel, thank you so much for joining us for our special coverage. Thank you. And that is where we will leave this edition of A Current Affair. You can, however, continue watching the funeral of Pope Francis on 9 Gem. I'm Deb Knight. Thanks for your company. From the team, enjoy your evening.